This is Joseph Carpenter. Today is December 16, 2024, and I'm interviewing Chris Cassidy. This interview is taking place at the offices of the National Medal of Honor Museum in Arlington, Texas. It is sponsored by the University of Texas at Arlington Department of History and Geography and is part of the Texas Veterans Project. Chris is the president and CEO of the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed today, sir.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Where were you born, and tell me a little bit about your growing up?
Yeah, I was born in Salem, Massachusetts. We lived there until I was just a young guy, and then we moved up to southern Maine. I consider York, Maine to be my hometown. We moved a couple places within Maine until I was in 5th grade, and then we settled in York, and that's where I went through the formative years in high school. Normal growing up in a small town. The beauty of the coastal towns in Maine is once the school year starts, all the tourists leave, and it's just this really small community where everybody knows each other. And then when the summertime comes around, it's inundated with tourists, which is wonderful for the town and wonderful for kids like me because you got lots of job opportunities. I mowed lawns. I worked in different restaurants. I picked corn. I did all kinds of jobs, and there was never a lack of opportunities to pay for your movie money and your gas money and that sort of thing. So just small town growing up. I never really thought about the military. I can get into that in a second, I guess. Mm-hmm. So just small town Maine growing up and just thoroughly enjoyed it. When I was when I was in the middle of high school, I knew I wanted to go to college, and the light bulb kind of dawned on me at some point, sophomore, junior year, that you got to actually pay for college. It's not a free thing, and we weren't poor, but paying for college would be a huge thing for my parents. So I remember that's when I started to figure out different ways you could do it. I was a good athlete, but and maybe in my sophomore year I thought that I could be a recruited athlete in football or basketball, but I just was naive to the fact that there's a lot of really good athletes out there. So somewhere in the junior year I realized, okay, I'm probably not going to be a college athlete scholarship, so let's think about other ways. And that's what got me looking into the military.
See, tell me a little bit about your parents.
Just normal working class people. My mom, she was a salesperson for Waste Management, the company that sells dumpsters and trash services to restaurants and things. Mm-hmm. So she would travel around the New England area. She had her clients there, and then at some point she changed over to what do they call it? Where you put the names on pens and trinkets that you pass out mm-hmm. at conventions and things.
Yes.
She was a salesperson for that. And my dad was an insurance salesman. He actually owned a restaurant in Bath, Maine, which is where Bath Iron Works is, when I was really little guy. And in fact, I remember coming home from school. Oftentimes we wouldn't go home. We would have the school bus take us to the restaurant. And my brother, who's 3 years younger than me, we would run around in the restaurant, and we thought it was the greatest thing because you could just tell the bartender to give you a Coke, and you had endless amounts of soda, which probably was not what my parents wanted for us to go to bed on time, but it was a lot of fun. I remember our dog my parents surprised us with a dog at the entryway of the restaurant, and so that was all good. But then restaurant business is hard, and it was for my dad too. So at some point he sold the restaurant and shifted over to insurance, and yeah.
What was the name of your high school?
The York High School. We were the York Wildcats.
And you said you played basketball and football?
Well, I played football in the fall, basketball in the winter, and baseball in the spring. It was a small high school, and it pretty much football ended on a Friday, and Monday basketball started, and basketball ended on a Friday, and Monday baseball started.
Wow.
And it was just, that was what you did. And it's quite different nowadays, particularly here in Texas. Maybe it was like this in Texas as well, but my kids growing up in Texas, you had to decide on what sport you're going to play when you're in like 4th grade.
Right.
It's difficult to juggle all of the travel teams and whatnot
Sure.
now. But in small town New England, it was normal. And
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. And I liked it a lot playing, having the year broken up with different sports. I knew baseball was never my favorite thing. I just kind of did that as something to do with my buddies in the spring. I just loved football and basketball.
So, did you go to college before you joined the military, or did you go in the military first?
So, as I mentioned, I was trying to figure out how to pay for school, and that's when I learned about ROTC at different programs, and that's when I learned about the service academies. And this is a really good story, actually, because it's sort of fundamental, and I do a lot of public speaking these days, and this is the story that I very often start with, and that is how I actually got to the Naval Academy. And so so back in the day, and you remember, where you go to the guidance counselor's office, and pre-internet, and the way you searched for colleges was there's stacks of big, thick books, and you flip through these books. Each page was a different school. And maybe it was organized by state, maybe it was organized by whatever. And I remember flipping through, and I got to pictures, nice, glossy, cool pictures of the buildings at the Naval Academy, and sharp-looking men and women marching around in uniform, and I thought, I can see myself there. I didn't have military in my background. My dad was briefly in the Marine Corps at the tail end of Vietnam. He never deployed to Vietnam, and then was in the reserve for a couple years. So just a tiny bit of exposure from his stories, which weren't a ton of them. But I just was drawn to that picture, and I liked the order and discipline that the picture represented. And then on the page, it tells you how you do it, and it says it's free to go here. You just have to be in the Navy. And as a 17-year-old, I didn't know what be in the Navy meant. Everybody bees in the Navy, right? It doesn't, you all do the same thing.
Right.
I had no concept that you can fly airplanes or submarines or surface ships or SEAL teams, I didn't know any of that. I just was like, okay, that looks cool. It's free to go, and I just have to pay a little time back to the country. It's all good. So the page also said you have to apply to your congressman to get a nomination there. So I did that, sent the paperwork off, got invited for an interview, went to the state capitol in Augusta, Maine. The interview went well, and the staff person, as I left the room, she said, okay, great job. We'll take care of it. We'll send all the stuff to the academy for you, and you're all squared away. And, me, that person who was probably like 26-year-old staffer or something, but to me, they were the voice of authority, and they said, I'm good. And so I left. And that was the fall of my senior year. Fast forward now all the way to the spring of my senior year, when everybody's finding out if you're into schools or not. And I was getting those envelopes from other schools, but nothing from the Naval Academy. And so finally I called the admissions office in Annapolis, explained my situation, a very helpful person. She was like, yeah, sure, I can help you out. Tell me your name again. I tell her my name. She rummages through files on the side of the phone. I could hear, can you spell your name? I spell it, more files. What's your social security number? More files. I'm sorry, we got nothing on you. You are not in our system.
Wow.
Turns out I missed a key piece of information. It was bad on me. I didn't do my homework well enough, but I missed the fact that you have to apply to the school and to the congressman's office parallel, two separate things.
Okay.
So I really effectively, here it is now, spring of senior year, late, and I hadn't really applied. But here's where it gets interesting, and here's why I share this story. My best friend and I had planned to join his father on a business trip from Maine to DC, like 8-hour drive, the next week, which was our spring vacation. And his dad was going to do work stuff, and my buddy and I were going to just do DC stuff. And we did exactly that. Now, the only deviation to the plan was I needed a half hour, and I went from DC to Annapolis, which is like a 30-minute drive. Walked into, long before 9/11, so you could just walk onto the base. Walked into the admissions office. I recognized the woman's voice. She recognized my story. And she said, oh, yeah, you need to talk to Captain Malillo, Marine Corps captain. He's the New England region admissions counselor, and he's in his office right now, third door on the right down there. Go in and see him.
Oh,
So I walked down the hall, never having ever met a military person active duty before, let alone a Marine.
right.
And I turned the corner, and before me is the poster child Marine. Super squared away uniform, shoes you could see your reflection in, square jaw, haircut, guns like busting out his sleeves. And I'm like, oh my God, who is this guy? And I was very intimidated, but I knew, like, okay, if I want to go to the Naval Academy, I got to tell this guy my story. So I tell him the story, total time in his office, 5-6 minutes at the tops. He asked a few questions and grunted and nodded his head like Marines do, and then said, okay, I'll get back to you. So I leave, drive back to my hometown, the whole time thinking, well, I can sleep soundly. I gave it my best shot. Nothing else I could have done, but I probably got to come up with a plan B.
Right.
The very next week, I'm in school, I get paged to the main office for a phone call, and it's him on the phone. Hey Cassidy, Captain Malillo here. I got good news. I can get you into the Naval Academy prep school, but I need an answer right now on this phone call if you want it or not. I didn't know what the prep school was, where it was, what the time. I didn't know anything about that process, but I just kind of felt like this is a door that's slightly ajar.
Yes.
And what side of that door do you want to be on when it shuts? So I said, yes, sir. Thank you. I'm in. And the reason I take the time to tell that story, Joe, is because if it wasn't for him, if it wasn't for a Marine Corps captain who didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, I was just a knucklehead from some Hoboken state.
You're right.
Where I didn't do the process. Every other kid did the process right, but I didn't. He could have just dismissed me. If it wasn't for the opportunity that he gave me, I would not be the president of the National Medal of Honor Museum today.
Right.
If it wasn't for that gift, because of him, I went to the Naval Academy Prep School, which is 1 year in Newport, Rhode Island. If you maintain certain grades, you automatically get admitted to the Naval Academy. While I was at the Naval Academy is when I saw my very first Navy SEAL guy, and there were some staff members, Navy SEAL staff members, and they motivated me and my classmates to pursue that. While I was in the SEAL teams, I met the first Navy SEAL to be an astronaut, Bill Shepard, and he guided me, mentored me, and showed me the way on how you apply to be an astronaut. I ended up getting selected. I was an astronaut for almost 18 years. Wrapping that up is when I got connected with the Medal of Honor Museum. All of that whole path, none of it would have happened if it wasn't for Captain Malillo giving me an opportunity.
And what was his name again?
Malillo, Mike Malillo.
Mike Malillo.
Here's want to see a cool wraparound to that,
yeah,
to that
sure.
story? My wife has heard me tell that story tens and probably 100 times. And in 2020, before my last launch to space, we had a party for friends and family in Boston. And she kept on asking me leading up to the party, what are you going to tell the people there? And I'm like, there are 200 of my friends and my family and closest friends. Like, it doesn't matter what I say. I'm just going to say, thanks for being here. And she goes, no, you should really tell the Captain Malillo story. I'm like, and she doesn't ever ask me to say stuff specifically. And I said, okay, I'll tell it. And so I'm there at the party, 250 people, all of whom I knew well. And I'm telling that story, and at the punchline, she said, Chris, hold on, stop. Captain Malillo, will you please stand up? She had tracked him down.
Like this is your life.
30-some years later, invited him. He had to be convinced that it wasn't a prank. And he was working as a civilian in the Pentagon. She got connected to him with the help of a friend, and he and his wife came to the party. And it was such a cool circle moment where I got to shake his hand, give him a hug, and say thank you.
Yes. Did he remember you? That's
the beauty of it. He didn't. He was like, every year I had a couple in my hip pocket that I could give out if the situation, he goes, I don't remember you. To be honest with you, it was just, I was doing my job, and that I thought was the coolest part of it.
It is cool because it just goes to show you something that someone does in passing may impact someone else's entire life.
That's exactly, when I do public speaking, that's exactly the point of the story, is that every one of us probably has a Captain Malolo in your life in
Yes.
some varying level of degree.
That's true.
And you don't know when you are going to be Captain Malolo for somebody else.
That's
And
the
it's
truth.
those precious moments in time that matter.
That's amazing. Well, let's back up a little bit and talk about the Naval Academy and your experience there. And it's the school before you go into the academy. What was it called again?
NAPS, Naval Academy Prep School.
Okay. And does everyone have to go through NAPS?
No.
Okay.
No, NAPS is kind of, and all the service academies have this same course. It's a couple hundred people. It's largely used as a kind of the same concept as a red shirt recruit for a normal college.
Sure.
So recruited athletes often go to NAPS to get another year of development and that sort of thing. It's also often used for applicants to the service academies who are already in the service, who are in this case already in the Navy, and it's been 4 or 5 years since they were a student, and then you go there and brush back up on your calculus and your chemistry and that sort of thing before you dive right into the academics. In my case, I was there not as a recruited athlete, and my academics were okay, but it turns out that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because you take the same courses the next year, your freshman year at the academy, and you already are exposed to what military ranks and customs and traditions of the military. You have a year of that under your belt already.
Right.
Whereas the kids coming right out of high school who graduated in June and now July they're a plebe, they're running around with their head shaved, getting yelled at.
Right.
It's all overwhelming to those kids. I would have been one of those kids, but
Sure.
instead I showed up all salty with a year of experience and 200 good friends already that, you see them in there, and it just felt like a little safety net that wouldn't have existed. It took me a bit to realize how fortunate I was. While I was doing the prep school, I was like, oh man, I wish I was there right now. But it was amazing. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Matured a ton. It seems like there's a greater than 1 year of maturity between an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old. It's a step curve of maturity, I think, in that 1 year. Yeah.
Yes. Did you play sports while you were in the academy?
It's interesting. I played basketball. Basketball was my best sport in high school. I was decent at football too, but I was pretty good at basketball. And I wanted to continue doing that. So I played basketball at Navy Prep School and maybe started 1 or 2 games, but I played a lot of minutes. Came off the bench right away. And then when I got to the Naval Academy, they had an open session for crew. And I knew that I wasn't good enough basketball player to ever be a starter on a Division I basketball team. So I remember thinking, why not try something new and give crew a try? So I rode crew for like the first month of my freshman year, and then just missed basketball too much. And so the basketball tryouts, I remember, were sometime in the middle of October. And the week before that, I stopped rowing crew, went to the basketball tryouts. Well, again, you gain a lot of knowledge with maturity, and little did I know that the tryouts were really the previous 2 months, as the coach would sit on the stands and watch everybody play pickup.
I see.
And so here I'm this guy that just randomly walks in, and so the guys that I played the previous year with made the team, but I didn't, which was all fine. It turns out, again, everything happens for a reason, and you're required to play some sport, and intramurals count. And so I just played intramurals my whole time there, and because most of the people at all service academies, but I'm talking about the Naval Academy, most of those kids all played college sport or high school sports in some way. So the competition in intramurals is pretty good.
Imagine, yeah.
And you don't have to have all the practice and the time and the waiver. You just go play the games on Tuesday nights or whatever. So I played intramurals and loved it the whole time.
What was it like for you? What was the academy like for you?
Well, as I mentioned, the preparation that the 1 year gave me made my freshman year rather stress-free. I mean, that's not true to say entirely stress-free, because when you're a plebe, they call it, at the Naval Academy, your time is very booked. From wake up, you have responsibilities, then you have school, then you got to know some knowledge about the military, and you're getting asked all the time, and you're getting yelled at. But all of that wasn't really stressful for me. I didn't worry about the person yelling at me. It just rolled right off because I'd been through that before. Right. I knew all the ranks and rates of the Navy and Marine Corps. And so that freshman year was just kind of fun. And to this day, my best friends in life are the ones I went through freshman year of the Naval Academy with,
Right.
and prep school. And so it was good. You know, as with any college experience, you've got a lot of fun times, and then there's stressful times in your exam periods, and the same thing true there. You also get to do some cool summer training, which is fun. They expose you to all the different, unbeknownst to me as a 17-year-old, I thought being in the Navy was all the same, as I told you.
Right.
But really, they expose you to all the different things that you can choose in the summers leading up to your senior year. So
I see.
you have a month on a ship, you have a month on a submarine, you have a month with an aviation squadron, you have a month with doing Marine Corps stuff. Mm-hmm. I did a month with SEAL training, and you're just exposed to it all, so that you can make a good decision for yourself and know what you're getting into when it's time.
Did you have a major while you were in?
Oh, yeah.
What was your major?
I was a math major. I was always good at math and reading, and I'm a slow reader, and I never liked writing papers, so I didn't really want to do anything that required a lot of reading and writing. Right. But numbers come naturally for me, and so it was a natural fit to be a math major.
I see.
Yeah.
And so what year did you graduate?
I graduated high school in 1988.
Okay.
1 year at prep school till 89, and then graduated the Naval Academy in 1993.
And when do you make the decision, or when did you make the decision to, apply to the SEALs? Right.
So all that exposure happens between the summers between freshman and sophomore and junior, and junior and senior year, and I had done all of those things, and I was pretty sure in my junior year that SEALs was the thing I wanted to pick, and that last summer locked it in for me. I'm like, yes, because I spent a month out in Coronado, which is where SEAL training is, and I was super excited and all in. And they have this thing called service selection, which just happened this year, just now, because my own kid is a senior there. He went through it. But when I was there, they call you down on the 1MC, which is a Navy term for the loudspeaker and on the whole ship or the whole school. And they call down, okay, 1 through 50 class rank, come down to the smoke hall, which is the place where they had it. And you line up on the wall. Number 1 person in the class all the way down, and then they go into the room and pick their billets, and then 51 through 100 come on down, and they just kind of cycle everybody till the last person in the class, number 1,000, whatever. That person walks in, and the one billet that's left is theirs, and they have no choice. And so every community has a finite number of billets, and when I was there, it was like a foot long, 2-inch long little nameplate with Velcro on the back, and you'd actually take it off the wall. So those things disappeared as the people chose them. And there were 16 billets for SEALs out of the class of 1,000. And you had to do some prerequisites. So it wasn't like 1 through 16 could automatically choose it. We sort of internally knew, okay, these are the folks that had done all the required things. And I felt I was I was 150-ish in my class, so felt pretty confident that I would get a billet, but still it's a nerve-wracking thing. Yeah. And I got one, and that's like, I think it was the spring of my senior year, and that's when we found out, and a couple months later you graduate, and it all starts.
So tell me about SEAL team training. What was that like?
SEAL training is an interesting thing. There's lots of documentaries and things on it these days, but when I was going through it, there was not a lot about it. It was all getting passed down verbal knowledge or verbal gouge from people that did it before you. Right. And once you got to the basic Coronado, talking to classes, because there's about 5 classes a year, and there's 3 phases of training. First phase is basically all physical fitness. Second phase is all about diving and underwater. And third phase is land warfare. And it's generally 6 months long or so. So each phase is about 2 months. And then they've got people in pre-training who are getting ready to start, and some class that just finished that they're waiting to get on with their orders. So there's a wealth of experience, immediate experience that you can talk to once you get there, but there's nothing like doing it yourself. And it's hard. It's every bit as hard as depicted. It's a good thing to do when you're 23, not 53. Where your body is a rubber band, and it's not like boot camp where you sleep there. I think they've modified it a little bit. So I'm speaking about my experience. Mm-hmm. As an officer, I did not have to have a room or barracks. I was married. I lived in the BOQ across the street with my wife, and wake up, whatever, 4:30. Had to be at PT at 5, and then you'd PT, and then you go to breakfast, and then you do a bunch of stuff until lunch, and you eat lunch, and you do a bunch of stuff until dinner, and we all ate dinner as a class. And then generally training was officially over after that, but you usually had to prepare for the next morning's events. So you'd be there till 7 o'clock at night or whatever. And then I'd go home and eat dinner with my wife, because you're just burning so many calories, you're eating all the time. And wake up and do it all over again. So it's not like you're sleeping in metal bunk beds and they're banging the right. Trash can lid. Right. It's not like that at all. Yeah. It's different, but it's really hard. It's tiring, but just so rewarding to do it. I could talk for a bunch of hours about the training. One particular story comes to mind, and this is an answer to why is the training, why is it organized in such a way that's so hard? Why does it need to be that way? Why do you need to be so cold all the time? Why do you need to stay awake for all those hours? Like, what's the purpose? And I thought a lot about this. I think though at fundamentally, it's probably true for all military training, but fundamentally, those external stressors strip out the I out of a person and builds back the we.
I see.
And so the very perfect example of this, it was Wednesday night of Hell Week. So Hell Week is the 5th week of first phase. So you've done like a month of training before you start Hell Week. It starts on a Sunday night, ends on a Friday. You don't really know what time on Friday it'll end. But it's just this blur of a thing all week long. Normally you eat in the dining hall, so you can kind of mentally break up your day into chunks between meals. And the instructors know on Wednesday, it's a big mental event to get halfway, so they don't let you eat in the dining hall on Wednesday night. Because in the dining hall, it's hot food. They don't mess with you for like 15 minutes. So you got to eat fast, but you can eat as much as you want. You can drink all the hot chocolate and coffee that you can get in your stomach. But on Wednesday night, they throw you cold MREs, and we're sitting on the beach. Your hands are all sandy, your uniform's all sandy, you got salt dripping into your MRE, and just watching, I remember watching the sunset over the western horizon and not thinking about quitting, but I was like, man, this sucks. Like, what am I doing here? And I had this distant stare in my eyes, and my buddy right next to me, Don, we all knew each other super well at this point. Yeah. And I'm an ensign, he's the E3 or something, but it doesn't matter, he's Don. in the class to me, and we're all there to help each other. And he saw that look, and he said something, but what I felt was his hand on my forearm. And I remember looking over at him, and he just looked at me and he goes, "You good?" And that's all it took, was him, my buddy, right there, pulling me right back into the moment. And I remember thinking, it's not so bad. However cold I am, he's equally cold. However tired I am, he's equally tired. So we're in this together, and together we'll get through it.
Yeah.
And that's really the core of it. And sometimes you need a dawn. Sometimes you may be the dawn for somebody else. And so that's really SEAL training in essence for me.
So when did you get married?
I got married right after I graduated from the Naval Academy, got married a couple weeks later, and then moved to San Diego to start training.
So what kind of gap are we talking about between the time you got married and when you started SEAL training? How much is that?
A month maybe. We got married, did a week of vacation, and then hopped in a car and drove to California, and I started right after that.
All right. How did you meet your wife?
We're divorced and remarried, but my wife is the sister of one of my Naval Academy classmates.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So she kind of knew what the gig was.
Yeah.
As you moved forward.
Yeah. Her dad was in the Navy, not a whole career, but he served in the Navy, and her brother obviously was doing the whole Naval Academy thing. So none of that was new.
So you finished SEAL team training. What came after that?
Immediately, you graduate SEAL training, and then again, it's slightly different now. But when I was going through, you as a class would go to Fort Benning, Georgia, and do static line jump school, and then would report to your first SEAL command. And there, for the next 6 months, you had follow-on training, which was called SEAL Tactical Training, STT, and at your team, and then you would be awarded your SEAL pin at the conclusion of that kind of 6-month probationary period. It's slightly different now. Nowadays, as a class, they all do SEAL Tactical Training together based out of Coronado, and then you go to your first SEAL team with your SEAL pin on. That way it's standardized all the training. What was happening was different teams were doing training slightly differently.
I see.
So anyway, more detail than we need to get into on the show. But so what's pertinent to my personal timeline is my oldest daughter was due right when I was supposed to go to jump school. So my whole class went to Fort Benning, Georgia. I went to Maryland and was present for the birth of my daughter. And a couple weeks later, then I went to jump school. And the only bummer about that, I was the only Navy guy there. Had I gone with my class, there would have been a group of 40 Navy SEALs.
Right.
But it was all good. I had a good time. And that was my first kind of inkling that all the services might be different in uniforms and mission and bases and duty assignments, but the core of the people is still the same. Sense of humor is still the same.
Yes.
The camaraderie is still the same. Because I was a sole Navy person inside a sea of Army folks at jump school, and I liked it a lot, actually.
So you went on to jump school. How do they choose then what SEAL team you end up with?
By then you knew, so the last couple weeks of your time at SEAL training, called BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition /S, SEAL, the S stands for SEAL. In your last couple weeks at BUDS, you receive your orders to your first command, and a month or so before that, you fill out a dream sheet of basically which coast you want to live on, because there's SEAL teams in Norfolk, Virginia, or Little Creek, Virginia, if anybody's familiar with the area, and Coronado, California. And then there's three, then 4 now, SEAL teams on each coast.
I see.
So by and large, you're picking which coast you want to live on. I wanted to be on the East Coast, and a lot of my classmates wanted to go to the East Coast. There's a team called SEAL Delivery Vehicle, SDV team. We drive mini submarines, launching from a full-size submarine with this little bitty mini submarine and go off and do missions. I loved that job. I loved the water. So I actually put in my first choice to be SDV Team 2 in Norfolk, Virginia, which, much to my classmates' kind of dismay, nobody, back then, nobody self-selected to go to SDVs because it's cold, you're underwater for 8 hours of a dive, and you're not doing all the traditional SEAL stuff where you're jumping out of planes. In fact, you're mostly underwater. But I liked all that stuff. And so all my classmates were like, you did what? You selected what? But I was so happy I did. So after jump school, I knew I was going to Virginia to be at SDV Team 2. And the other cool thing was, I think in my class we had, I don't know, maybe 15 ensigns, O1s in the Navy, and many of them showing up to the same team at the same time, where 4 or 5 guys are all vying for the same billets to be in a unit or get a special deal to go to jump school, to advanced jump school or sniper school or some extra training. Everybody was vying for those same spots. I was the only brand new guy at SDV Team 2, so I got into a platoon right away. I got to do extra training as needed, almost as soon as it was available. So it was a good deal all the way around for me, and had an amazing commanding officer, the first one there, a guy named Doug Lau. He was just such a good leader, very level-headed. It was the perfect person to see right out of the gate for me on what a naval officer how a naval officer conducts himself.
Well, I was going to ask you that question, and this can apply all the way through your time in the Naval Academy, all the way through this experience of going into the SEALs and actually going and doing SEAL type things. Who influenced you?
Professionally? Yeah. That's a great question. So, of course, my classmates in SEAL training, my classmates at the Naval Academy, we all influenced each other. I saw at the Naval Academy, there's lots of people and lots of different leadership styles, and I saw some that I liked a lot, and others were, I don't remember specifically, but I remember some that were like, okay, that's not really how I would have handled that situation. But it's not until you get into your first real unit because in school I found a lot of the leadership training is in a classroom and books, and you read a case study and you talk about it. Entirely different when you're actually in a unit and it's the life you're living, and there's a leader that you respect or that you wish would do it differently. And I had all of those, but mostly leaders that I wanted to emulate. And my first Navy chief was a guy named Mike Slinger, and he was wonderful. I didn't know, I conceptually knew what a senior enlisted does for a junior officer in a small unit. But once you actually get in there and you have a rapport between that young junior officer who's 23 and the salty, grizzled, experienced chief, and you get it dialed in, working really, it's magic. And to be led by him, but lead him, and he was the kind of person that totally enabled me to lead him, but him leading me.
Wow.
It was a great example. And funny, my own daughter, fast forward later in life, she was a submarine officer. She's out of the Navy now. Wow. But she got to her first submarine, and I remember talking to her about, hey, do you like your chief? Well, I don't know, I'm not really. And I could tell she didn't know if she thought he was doing a good job or not. But turns out, from some examples she was telling me, like, that's not a good chief.
Right.
Long story short, the command moved him out because he was doing a horrible job for lots of other things, and they put a good chief with her. And she called me like a couple weeks later, like, oh my God, Dad, I know what you're talking about now, about what a good chief, what a difference a good chief can make.
Very good.
Yeah.
So where did you go after, or when you joined your first unit? Were you deployed
Yeah.
soon after that? What happened?
Yeah, so I think it's common military-wide, but in the Navy specifically, you're together as a unit for about 2 years.
Okay.
The last 6 months of that is your overseas deployment, and the year and a half preceding that, you're doing training as an individual, training as a unit, and then your unit with other units before you then go off and represent your country to some overseas location. And I did that cycle twice at SDV team. So a total of 4 years I was there. The first 2 years I was a dry deck shelter officer. Dry deck shelter is the detachable compartment that gets fixed to the back of a full-size submarine from which we launched the SDV.
I see, okay.
And it can't go on all submarines. The submarine has to be configured to receive it with special bolts and mounting and gas lines passing up into it. But I was in charge of that, which was really kind of cool because here I am, a brand new SEAL officer, but I was in charge of divers and technicians that maintained it. So that was my primary job, but my secondary job was I was assistant SEAL platoon person for the SDV. So I followed around a more senior SEAL who was responsible for all the SEALs in the platoon, and I was responsible for all the technicians and divers and non-SEAls. And had another great chief there named Glenn James, and I learned a ton because I was the primary liaison between the SEAL team and the submarine crew. So oftentimes I'd be on the submarine without my SEAL unit and got to know the submarine skipper very well and developed a really quality relationship. In fact, I just saw him a couple months ago at a Naval Academy football game, and we bumped into each other at the stadium, and and we both recognized each other instantly, and so that was great.
That's great.
And so that was another really good learning time, was to be exposed to how other communities in the Navy lead and be around submarine junior officers and not just around SEAL junior officers. So I did that for 2 years. We deployed to the Mediterranean. There was not a whole lot of conflict going on. There was some stuff in Bosnia-Herzegovina that was skirmishes and stuff, but we weren't so involved with that on the SDV side. And then I stayed in the same unit when we came back from deployment, and then just moved over to be the SEAL SDV platoon guy. So I kind of moved up in responsibility on the SEAL side and did that for another 2-year cycle, and then transferred to graduate school and went to Boston for graduate school.
Okay. And what was your master's degree in?
Master's degree was in ocean engineering, and right around that time was when I met Bill Shepard, who was the first SEAL to become an astronaut, and he was the one that said, because I had never thought about being an astronaut before that.
Really?
And I knew about NASA. Every kid knows about NASA. I was in sophomore maybe in high school when Challenger accident happened. I remember sitting in the cafeteria and they wheeled in the TVs. And so certainly knew about flying in space and the risks that the space shuttle have, but it wasn't something I ever even thought of. And in talking to him, the light bulb came on like, well, because I thought you had to be a pilot or you had to be something else that I wasn't. And talking to him, he educated me that no, anybody can apply. You got to be a U.S. citizen and you got to have a college degree. I had both those things. And he said, but if you want to be competitive, you probably should have a master's degree. It's not required. It is now, by the way. But back then, it was not required. He said, if you want to make yourself a little more competitive, you should probably have a master's degree. And at that point, too, we had 2 young kids and a third one on the way. And I'd been 4 years basically busy and deploying and coming home and cleaning my underwear and going back out. You know, and families are pretty resilient, but I tell people a family can do that like 2 or 4 years, and then you kind of need a break.
Right.
And I knew that was the case, and I was ready for one myself as well. And so graduate school was a perfect fit, and that's when I met Shep, and he said, and the graduate degree probably should be in engineering.
Okay.
And so I was like, okay, how do I get to be, get accepted to an engineering program, a quality program? And I was doing a little research, and MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, had an ocean engineering program, and one of the professors focused on underwater vehicle navigation. And I would just spent 4 years of my life navigating underwater vehicles. Right. And so I wrote my application about that experience, and that was actually smarter than I realized, because MIT is a hard place to get into. Yeah. But I had that experience that the other applicants didn't have.
Right.
And so I was a good student, but not like an amazing engineering student in my undergrad, because you have to take some engineering when you're at the Naval Academy. I see. But the professor admitted me, and you know.
How long did it take for you to finish your master's degree?
2 years. Well, like a summer, less than 2 years. I got there at the end of a summer, and then in June of 2 years later, I graduated. Basically 2 years.
Okay. So what year is this then that you finished your master's
I left,
degree?
my last operational time at STV team was in summer of 1998.
Okay.
And then I graduated in the summer of 2000 from MIT.
And what came after that?
After that, I went back to a SEAL unit, and this time transferred across the coast to SEAL Team 3. The even SEAL teams are on the East Coast. The odd SEAL teams are on the West Coast. 1, 3, 5, and 7. 2, 4, 8, and 10 are on the East Coast. SEAL Team 6, formerly known as SEAL Team 6, is there as well. Now it's called something else. And so I was in Boston and transferred over to the West Coast. Interestingly enough, on that cross-country drive, we were driving to San Diego. We kind of took a little bit of a southern detour to go to Houston and visit Bill Shepard, who was about to launch on the first crew of the International Space Station. He was the commander of what we call Expedition 1. And he and the 2 Russians that he flew up there with, they'd been training for a couple, 3, 4 years to get to this point. Little did I know how lucky my timing was, because I remember, and this is early days of cell phones. Remember flip phones, where you didn't have service for a lot of parts of a drive.
Right.
And I remember we pulled over in Shepherd, Texas. I remember that because I was calling Bill Shepard in Houston and telling him, hey, sir, we'll be there about 5 o'clock. Is today still a good day to say hi? And he said, yes, absolutely. My crew and I, we leave tomorrow, but we're getting together at a restaurant, and you're welcome to come by and say hello.
Wow.
So and it was my daughter's birthday, I remember that too, and so we pulled into Houston, again, pre-9/11, you could drive right onto the Johnson Space Center. We met him at the building, we drove over to Boondoggles, which now at the time I didn't know, but it's like the hangout for astronauts, that restaurant right there, right by the Johnson Space Center.
I see.
And so we went to Boondoggles with Bill Shepard, Sergei Krikalev, and the other Russian gentleman who he was launching with, and leaving America the next day to go to Russia for their launch they're going to be gone for the next 8 months. And so that was really cool. That was the first time I ever met Sergei Krikalev. He, for the longest time, was the human being on Earth with the most time in space. His record just was recently broken by another Russian gentleman. But he's a space legend. Yeah. I didn't know it. At the time, you're just like, oh, pass the burgers and pass the ketchup.
Right.
So that was pretty cool, and then continued on out to California, where I went to my duty station.
Were your kids with you when?
Oh yeah, we're driving across country on a household move.
So, did they have any concept of what was going? Were they old enough to understand what was going on?
The oldest one was, yes. So this would have been in 2000. She was born in 94, so she was like 6.
Okay.
And yeah, she understood I don't think she fully grasped the whole picture. You know, how much does a 6-year-old get
Right.
in the big picture? She knew we were at the space place, and she knew we were talking to somebody that I was excited to talk to. The other two were, and it was her birthday, and we just got ice cream at Baskin Robbins, so she was all happy. The other two were too young to process all that.
I see.
Yeah.
So where did you go after that?
So that was in Houston. We just kept on going west, and we went right to Coronado and checked into SEAL Team 3.
All right, and how long were you with SEAL Team 3?
So this is interesting because I was at SEAL Team 3 for the next 2 years, and as we just talked about the deployment cycle, you're trained with your unit for 1.5 years, and then you deploy for overseas for 6 months. Well, SEAL Team 3 was the geographic area of the world that it's responsible for is the Middle East.
I see.
And so our SEAL platoon, which was about 18 guys, we knew we were deploying to the Middle East around Thanksgiving time of 2001.
I see, okay.
So for the 1.5 years preceding Thanksgiving of 2001, we had done all of our training. In fact, it was late August, and we completed our last major exercise with other ships and other units. So we were basically fully qualified and ready to deploy. Guys were getting ready to take some vacation in September when 9/11 happens. And so here we are. We just happened to be the most ready to go platoon, a SEAL platoon in the whole organization, and we're going to there anyway. So I remember 9/11 was like 9 a.m. Eastern time, so it was 6 a.m. in California. I remember I was in the shower, and my wife came in and said, "Oh, you got to come watch TV." And so I went to work that day, not sure if I was coming home from work at the end of that day, or meeting my wife and kids at the airport to say goodbye. Now, turns out we packed all of our stuff, but it took 10 days, 2 weeks for the big movements to get sorted out. Who's going where, what airplanes are doing what. But it was end of September, first week, I forget the date, but pretty much like a couple weeks later, we flew out. We flew to Kuwait, waited there a couple days, then flew to Oman, and then from Oman flew into Kandahar, Afghanistan, sometime early October.
I see. And were you involved in a combat or any combat operations during this time?
Oh yeah, extensively. So we were there. So the airfield at Kandahar is obviously a strategic first foothold for any, airports were key in World War II, and they were key in the global war on terror. So Kandahar is in southern Afghanistan, and it has a big runway, and so that was the very first thing we had to get. We and some Marines and another SEAL unit were the first and second and third nights into the Kandahar area of operations and securing the airfield there. And then slowly, bit by bit, as each night, because airplanes would only fly at night for security reasons, more supplies would come in, more people, more Marines, and more just people, and the perimeter would grow until we could secure the whole airfield. And that took weeks. Logistics is a long, slow-moving thing. But in that time, we were doing combat operations based out of Kandahar, going to the Afghan-Pakistan border to do lots of different missions. Yeah.
What was that experience like for you? Were you prepared for that?
Well, that's a great question, because that's one of the things I like very much about the military is this notion of rotating units every couple years, and usually you move to another unit and you get placed in a little bit more of a role or with more responsibility. Maybe you have more people beneath you, maybe you are in charge of more things or bigger budget or whatever, but each rotation is increasing responsibility. And you don't know it, especially when you're young. You don't realize how equipped you are for that role. Like the military wouldn't put you in a role that you weren't ready for
Right.
in theory. You know, some people aren't, and they stumble and they, you know, get moved and somebody else comes in.
Yeah.
But by and large, the system gets you ready for each of those roles. So I do remember on the flight over to Afghanistan thinking to myself, holy cow, I was sitting on the airplane looking around just like this, and all the faces of the guys in my platoon. And I was the platoon commander.
Oh.
And I remember thinking, wow, there's a lot of responsibility. Like, I'm going to be involved with decisions that affect the health and wellness of these people, their spouses, or their girlfriend, or their moms and dads. And I just had this weight on the airplane, like, oh my gosh, am I ready for this? Am I really ready? And but then you get on the ground and you just do the best you can. You make decisions with all the information that you have at hand. You get advice from the people that are around you. Collectively, you can make the best decision that you can at the time. Most of the time, it's a good one. Every now and then, it's a bad one. And hopefully, you've got time to react to the bad part and correct it. And that's what makes units strong, is when together you can collectively make those decisions and get through it all.
This is a difficult question. Did you lose anyone close to you?
No, we didn't, very thankfully. And that's something that either it's luck or whatever, but everybody in my unit that deployed with us came back. Now, on subsequent deployments, a number of those guys didn't make it, which is really, really sad, obviously. But that deployment, everybody came home.
Excuse me, how long or how many deployments did you have after that one?
So I had 2 6-month deployments prior to 9/11,
Okay.
and then that one immediately after 9/11, so 01 into 02, and then a second deployment to Afghanistan, 03 into 04, and during that deployment is when I had an application pending at NASA
I see.
and received the news right at the end of that deployment that I'd been chosen to be an astronaut.
How different was the second deployment from the first deployment?
It was starkly different because at the first one, there was no infrastructure, military infrastructure. Like, we were eating MREs, we were going to the bathroom, ammo crates. I don't know if everybody's watching knows what an ammo. The ammunition cans come wrapped in these wooden things,
Right.
and you can take the sides off the wooden things, and they make a perfect toilet.
Right.
And we were using those as our stool for the bathroom, eating MREs, sleeping on. We had cots, but just sleeping bags in partly a tent, and then we moved into a rundown structure that we kind of spoofed up a little, spiffied up a little bit. And then when I came back 2 years later, there were shower trailers, there was a full-on dining hall. Right. It was like entirely different on the creature comfort side. On the operational side, it was different too. The first deployment, we would do a mission that night, collect information, take what the village elder said and what this village elder say. We'd piece that all together. Okay, the bad guys are over there. The next night we go over there, and just kept on building the bridge as we were walking on it.
Right.
And and not a whole lot of chain of command. Chain of command can be helpful, and it can also slow you down.
Yes.
And we were just information, intel and action, and just building that out. And then when I went back in 2003, 2004, much more traditional military structure, big old TOC tent, Tactical Operations Center tent,
Right.
with some colonel at the desk making all the decisions, and you got to brief the colonel to go do your mission or to go out the gate, and it was just different. I'm not saying that's bad. Those processes and procedures exist to keep people safe and to keep everything coordinated, and
Sure.
so we don't have a bunch of individual units running amok. So it's all good, but it was just starkly different.
How long was each one of these deployments? How long did they last?
They were like 7 months each one. Yeah.
How did you communicate with your family while you were
The
away?
first one, it was very difficult. The internet did exist, but it was a dial-up connection, and it was like 1 or 2 terminals, and there would be a huge long line for it. And same thing with the DSN phone. There was a DSN phone, but it always had somebody on it.
Right.
You had to be respectful for the rest of the line.
Sure.
You had to limit your call to whatever, less than 10 minutes or something fast. Something that went by super fast,
Yes.
especially if it didn't get connected on the first ring. You know, your minute is already up and you haven't even connected. It's so painful. So that was the first time. And I remember my platoon chief, he came back to the tent one day just kind of laughing. And I said, "What's going on?" And he goes, "Well, you know the line, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "I waited in line. I get all the way to the front. I dial my wife, and she answers, and the phone disconnected. I dial her again, and she can't hear me. I dial her again, and she goes, I'm all the way up to like minute 8, and finally we get a decent enough signal, and she goes, okay, I know you're going to lose it. I got to sell the house. So-and-so has the daughter, whatever. Michelle has a boyfriend. I got to sell the house, and your orders to transfer us to across the country just arrived. Love you." And it hung up. He's like, what? How is this supposed to be helpful?
Right. All that in a minute.
All that in like 30 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the second time I went back, it was a little bit more robust communication lines, and internet was 2 years later. Internet was better. Email was better. Bandwidth was better. Mm-hmm. You could actually receive a digital picture. So it was just easier to stay in touch.
How did you deal with stress during this time? Especially during those 2 deployments.
Yeah. Stress is an interesting thing, and people and cultures deal with it differently. I think that there's a sort of sense of humor in a combat unit that might not translate to be humorous here in Arlington, Texas. But there, humor is just, I think, the best way to deal with stress. And there's, lots of examples, and they show it in every military movie you see. There'll be freezing, and there'll be bullets going over their heads, and the guys will look at each other and say something sarcastic, and they both laugh. Right. And that, to me, kind of summarizes it all. You can't laugh your way through all of it. And at some points, too, especially... like I mentioned, in that unit, we didn't have anybody pass away, but we knew adjacent units that had somebody die, and I went to many ceremonies where they've got the rifle sticking up and the helmet on top of it, and the boots on the ground. It's just very sobering, and it hits you no matter who you are. And in those cases, it's helpful to have your people to talk to. I'm not a super religious person, but the chaplains are always there, and that's helpful too. But I think just talking amongst yourselves is helpful.
So what kind of challenges did being away from home create for you?
On that deployment, we as a unit, and I think largely military, sensitive to force, what am I trying to say? Like operational security, and not just saying on a open line DSN, hey, we just landed in Kandahar. Tomorrow night we're going to Jalalabad, and
gonna kill some bad guys.
Yeah, we'll be gone for 3 days, so we wouldn't say that kind of stuff. But I can't remember whose idea it was. It might have been my dad's. But we put a map in my house and put different colored pins in countries over there in the Middle East.
Oh, that's interesting.
And had a blown up one of Afghanistan and had more pins in different parts of Afghanistan. And then I had the decoder ring in my notebook, and so I could say, yeah, we're still in the yellow pin.
Oh, that's good.
And anticipate being here for a while or whatever. So that made it easier to kind of talk, because Because a lot of times, particularly in that early part of Afghanistan, something would be reported on CNN, U.S. military special forces unit just got in contact in Mazar-e-Sharif or something. Without that knowledge of where we were, every one of those reports would be stressful for the family.
Sure.
And not that they're not in general on edge, because it could happen. But if they knew that that was a different part of the country than we were, it made for a better few days until I actually called.
Right.
Yeah.
So you said after the second deployment, that's when you learned that you'd been accepted into the space program, is that?
Yep. So the astronaut application process is a long one. You submit, NASA takes all of those, figures out who they want to bring to Houston for an interview, and the interview is largely medical. There's an actual real interview in that week, but you're there for a week. And because it's medical, the medical clinic can only handle about 20 people per week.
Oh.
And so throughout the fall, or throughout like a several month period, they have a week of interviews, and then they give themselves a break, and then another week of interviews. And so there was about 6 or 7 weeks of interviews. And I had done my week at the Johnson Space Center right before that 6-month deployment. And the selection office, I told them, hey, next week I'm going to Afghanistan, so you probably won't be able, you can't call me. If you need to get in touch with me, send me an email and tell me to call, and I'll call you. And so I didn't hear anything for the whole 6 months. They were going through the process, and it was just happening. And then the end of that deployment, I was actually coming back to the United States that weekend, and I got an email that said, call the selection office, please, on Monday at whatever, 12 o'clock. And so I actually was back in my house in Virginia when I got the phone. They actually called me, even though I was supposed to call them. The phone rang in my house, and they were thinking I was in Afghanistan, but I was really there. And that's the second phone call that changed the direction of my life. First one being Captain Malillo, and the second one, hey, Chris, would you like to come work at NASA? And off I went.
Wow. It's amazing.
Yeah.
What rank were you at this time?
I was a lieutenant commander.
Okay.
04.
04.
Like a major in the Army.
Do you continue on active duty in the Navy as you're going through astronaut training?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people don't realize that. So astronaut selection is open to the entire population of the United States. The requirements are you have to be a U.S. citizen and have a bachelor's degree. When I applied now, we talked about it, you got to have a master's minimum now. Yeah. But that's it. Doesn't matter, military, civilian. And the class that is selected, it's usually about, in the 90s there were some big classes, 40 people or so, but now it's usually 15 or less, 10 to 15 people. And there's no requirement that X number have to be military and Y number have to be civilian. Okay. It could be any class demographics that the best candidates. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so if you're a civilian and you apply, you become a government civil servant and you get your pay as a GS whatever. If you're a military person and apply, it's effectively a new set of PCS duty station orders, and you report to the Johnson Space Center, so you stay at your rank and you file your travel claim, all that normal stuff. You have to do we call them fitness reports in the Navy. I don't know what the Air Force calls evaluations, but you got to do that same whole cycle. Administrative, got to do the PT test twice a year, all the normal stuff, and you remain active duty. The beauty of it is throughout your whole time, you're accruing time towards retirement, and so then you can retire as a military person, which I did.
So tell me about astronaut training. What was that like for you? Astronaut
training it's lots of things. It's really cool. And you show up with your astronaut class, and you're together as an astronaut class for 2 years. You become very tight. We had 11 of us Americans, 3 Japanese, folks, JAXA, which is Japanese Space Agency, they selected their folks. They weren't part of the NASA selection, but they time it so that we all go through training together, living in Houston. They move their families to Houston. It's just really cool. It's about that 2 years, roughly speaking, half your time is in the classroom where you're learning theory and studying diagrams, wiring diagrams, electrical diagrams, learning space mechanics and all these things. And then you apply those theory into the different simulators that we have. So it's a lot like being in graduate school, where you have some time in classroom, some time in the lab. Also part of our job as astronauts is public outreach. So we have to be knowledgeable about all the things that NASA does. So you visit all the NASA centers. There's 13 NASA centers around the country. And you visit all of them, get a bit understanding of what happens at each one of those locations, talk to a lot of school kids. In fact, this is kind of funny. The very first week I was an astronaut, maybe later part of the week we had a press conference. And that day or the day before, the afternoon before, or that day, you go into the supply department and the guy looks at you, oh, what size? You look like a 42 regular, and he throws you a blue flight suit with 42 regular, and you put it on, and it's okay. And so I had just done that. I had just only had that flight suit on that one time, and out now we're on the stage, and the public event happens, and I come off the stage, and this probably fourth grader comes running up to me and goes, oh my God, you're an astronaut, what's it like? And he was just in awe that he was talking to an astronaut. And in my head, I'm like, kid, you probably know more about Pluto than I do. Like, I am not qualified. But that moment in time, I realized that kid, like, I didn't even know where the bathroom was in NASA, but that kid didn't know that. That kid, right. Because I was wearing the outfit, right. That kid saw me as a representation of our United States space program. Yeah. And that was a really eye-opening moment for me, like, okay, yeah. You're in a really unique position. It's a really, you have the benefit of being able to positively impact young people right. Just by representing the agency and wearing this blue outfit. Right. And that was a neat moment, like, okay, and off we went. So you get exposed to all that, and you learn how to do public speaking and those sort of things.
I see. So where then, in the progress of this, are you assigned to an actual mission? How long does that take? How long is the training? How long does it take to be assigned?
So you're an astronaut candidate for 2 years, okay. And you're not eligible to be assigned to a mission at all. You don't really have any responsibility other than to learn, soak it all in, and you have to pass a bunch of tests. Like every week you're getting tested on something. And then you graduate, and now you're in the astronaut office. When I showed up, there was 120 astronauts. Just interesting fact, when I left, that was 2004, 2021 when I left, there were like 40 astronauts. And so that difference is because in 2004, we were still flying the space shuttle. The space shuttle has 7 seats in it. We're flying 5, 6, 7 times a year. Mm-hmm. So, that's roughly-ish 40 people per year that we're putting in space. And then you've got to have the crew that's up, couple crews getting ready to go, crew that just got back. And so you add that all up, you need a pretty big office size. Mm-hmm. And then when I left in 2021, we were just flying 4 Americans a year on a Soyuz. Wow. And SpaceX too had just started picking up, but very different number of people per year that we were putting. Mm-hmm. So the office size shrunk accordingly. But your question was, what's the timing of all that? So the first 2 years, you're astronaut candidate, not eligible to be assigned to a mission. Then, 2004 got there, 2006 done with the training, and now I'm a full-fledged astronaut. My first mission was 2009, 3 years later. So in those 3 years, you get assigned to special projects, you work in mission control, mm-hmm. You do your own advanced training, and then you get assigned to a mission and you work as a crew. Wow. Leading up to the mission. So for me, that was a space shuttle on Space Shuttle Endeavour, summer 2009. And all space shuttle missions are 2 weeks long based on how much oxygen we can put in the tanks. Even though we went to the space station, and you can think of the shuttle as a big king cab pickup truck. You got a huge bed where you haul a bunch of stuff, and then 2 rows of seating where the crew can be. And the shuttle, it's got an upstairs called the flight deck and a downstairs called the mid deck, and then the payload bay, which is the bed of the pickup truck where we haul all the stuff. And so we went to the space station, we brought up components of the space station and assembled it and did some spacewalks to outfit those items. But yeah.
Did you do a spacewalk at that time on that first mission?
I did 3 of them. I've done 10 total in my life, 3 on that mission, 3 on my second mission, and 4 on my last mission.
What was that like?
It's unbelievable. There's a lot of things we do as astronauts that you don't really have to be an astronaut to do, right? Like email and just various things, especially on the ground. But then you get up in space and you're in, and sometimes it sounds funny, but even though you're floating and you're in zero gravity, you're inside the spaceship, your day is so scripted, like there's a schedule that you have to follow, that oftentimes your brain is constantly thinking of the tasks that you're trying to do and stay up on top of your schedule and not get behind. Right. And sometimes it's easy to forget that you're actually orbiting our planet.
Wow.
And you float by a window and you look down and you go, oh, wow, that's Florida. And you know, it kind of brings you to the moment, like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. So sometimes you can forget that you're there. That's where I was going to, because when you do a spacewalk, now all of a sudden, instead of being inside the spacecraft where you've got structure all around you, you're wearing clothes like you and I are wearing right now, it feels very normal. And now you're about to step out. And the analogy I often use is, imagine you go to the top of a skyscraper. You're at the very top of the new Lowe's Hotel, right here, across the block. Very top floor, but you got glass around you, your feet are on a carpet, you've got a handrail, you're looking down, you're like, oh, it's pretty far. But you feel safe, unless you're super freaked out by heights, but you feel pretty safe, like, oh, okay. If you just go 10 more feet up, and now your toes are over the edge of the building, there's no handrail, you're like, oh, the wind is growing across your face, your brain is telling you something entirely different, like, back away, this is not safe, don't be here. Right. And that's, I thought, what it's like the first time I did a spacewalk. You know, from the comfort of inside the spacecraft, you open the handle, you lift the handle up, and now the only thing separating you and 250 miles below to Earth is your little visor. And you're holding on with a metal handrail, watching Earth go 5 miles a second beneath your toes. It is really freaky. For me, it was. Yeah. And, you know, thankfully, for first-time spacewalkers, we build in 10 minutes, it's called adaptation, into the plan, because the spacewalks are very scripted in what you're supposed to do. The time is the biggest resources while you're out there. Right. So we manage that time really tightly. But for first timers, 10 minutes, it says adaptation, which really means just relax. Right. Wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers, and get yourself sorted out. And that's good, you know, and I don't know if it took the full 10 minutes, but my heart was like, dook, 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 and then settle down and get back and get into it and then get on with the tasks.
And so how many shuttle missions were you involved in?
I did 1 shuttle mission, STS-127, that one. Right. And then I've done 3 missions total. The second and third were both on a Russian Soyuz with 2 Russian cosmonaut crew members.
How was that? That had to be different.
Well, it's difficult in today's day and age where there's tension between our countries and Russia's in Ukraine and all the politics of it. It's kind of a little difficult to comprehend. But we've had NASA and Russia have been collaborating on the International Space Station and on the Russian Mir space station before that since the late 90s. And because of that, we always have American astronauts in what's called Star City, which is basically an ex-military base right outside of Moscow where
Okay.
all of the astronaut or cosmonaut training takes place. It's about as far, if Moscow was downtown Dallas, Star City is where Arlington is.
I see.
About that far, not far.
Okay.
Quick drive. And so Russian cosmonauts are in Houston all the time. And so we know each other really well. We know their families. And then you get assigned as a crew. And I had 2 cosmonaut crewmates, and you're together for 2 years. Them coming to Houston, you going to Moscow. We eat dinner with families. Their families have been to my house. I've been to their house. I've been to their aunt and uncle's house and birthday parties for cousins.
Wow.
Like, you really know them, and you're
Yes.
friends.
Yes.
And you spend a lot of time with your Russian language teacher, with your system technical instructors. And so there's this human connection that exists that transcends Russia and the United States. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was a very personal and friendly experience the whole time, always. Wow. And those folks are still friends today. We don't email, we don't really call, just because of the nature of the times that we live in. Yeah. But if I saw them in Houston or saw them in Russia, it would be like no time had ever gone by, and we were good buddies. So now I don't want to paint the picture that there's no tension at all between NASA and the Russian version of NASA, which is called Roscosmos. I have seen, particularly as a management astronaut, where tensions exist between the Houston Control Center and the Moscow Control Center, or more specifically at the higher level agency to agency, where money in exchange of services is involved and negotiation of all that. It can get tense. We're still partnering with the Russians. We don't pay. So when I flew on the Soyuz, we, the United States, paid actual money to Russia for my training and my launch and my spacesuit and all the stuff. But the first time in 2013, I think it was $57 million that we paid.
Wow.
And then in 2020, it was 80 something, like 82 million. So a crazy amount of money. Thankfully, anymore, we don't exchange actual money. We trade launch services. So an American will fly on a Russian Soyuz in exchange for a Russian flying on a SpaceX. And the reason we do that, instead of just going totally separate, is in case there's a problem with one of those vehicles, both sides will always have somebody on the space station. It's sort of an insurance program.
So when were you promoted to commander during this period of time?
Commander of the space station?
Commander in the Navy.
Oh, I was a commander in the Navy when I launched on my second mission in 2013.
Okay.
And then when I flew and then sometime after that made captain, 06. Right. And so my last mission, I was an active duty Navy captain.
Were those promotions muted at all by the fact that you were an astronaut? In other words, the experience of making rank, particularly 06, was that kind of, like I said, muted?
So that's an insightful question, actually, because I haven't really thought about it, but the answer is yes. Like while I was at NASA, this would be my uniform every day. Like I never put my uniform on. It's a civilian agency. I would put my uniform on if my friend was having a retirement ceremony or a change of command. I'd fly to Virginia or San Diego and attend it and put my uniform on. But that was about it. And so when I got selected, I was in 04. So I had 2 promotions while I was at NASA, 04 to 05, 05 to 06. And both of those, it amounted to going on to the exchange.com and buying new collar devices, and that's about it. I had to make sure I had a new picture in my service record with the appropriate uniform articles.
Right.
I didn't really have any. It was a non-event. So that's an insightful question. I never thought about that, but I didn't pay much attention to it.
I could see where it would be.
I cared more about what was coming in my bank account the next month.
Right, which is important. How did your being in space or in the space program affect your family? What was that like?
Oh, it was much easier than actively doing stuff in the SEAL teams.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, there's travel involved as an astronaut, especially when you get assigned to the International Space Station. When I was an astronaut candidate those 2 years, you have some trips and you go a few places, but they're generally short trips. You're home within a couple, 3 days, maybe 4 days at the longest. So that wasn't so bad. And then when I was training for the space shuttle, all the training is in Houston. The launch, of course, is in Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Maybe 1 or 2 times we went to Kennedy Space Center as a crew for a couple days to do some particular preparation. But your life is in Houston.
Yes.
And then when I got assigned to the International Space Station, that's when travel picks up significantly, because the International Space Station is 5 space partners: NASA, Russia, Japan, Canada, and the European Space Agency, which is like 15 or 16 countries. And each one of those 5 has training locations in their country. And those countries are proud of the components that they have of the space station, so they want to be the host that trains you on their system. So as a result, as a crew, you go to each of those countries, which is fun individually, but it's more time away, and international travel always takes longer than domestic travel. So you could be gone for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And then because we spend so much time in Star City outside of Moscow, NASA has built their American-looking townhomes that are plopped in the middle of this Russian culture. And there's cottage 1, 2, and 3. And while you're training for 2 years, you get assigned a room that's pretty much yours. You share it with somebody not who's there at the same time, but when you leave, they might come into it. But it's a normal bedroom with its own bathroom and a common kitchen. And so we'd go to the grocery store and buy our groceries. And so that was kind of fun. But you spend a lot of time in Moscow.
When did you when were you promoted to chief astronaut? I may be rifling through a lot of events.
No, so after my second mission, which was 2013, I got back in 2014. I had at this point had a decent amount of experience as a spacewalker, and so after that mission, I was given the job of the head of EVA, which EVA is spacewalking. So I was kind of responsible for training of the spacewalking group, and around that time, the chief astronaut, I did that for like a year, and then the chief astronaut at the time was moving on to do another mission himself, and that's when I was asked to step in and do that. The boss of the astronauts is the guy who's in charge of flight operations, and flight operations has our aviation part at Ellington Field, our NASA astronauts, and mission control. So all of the technical people in mission control work for this person in charge of flight operations. So the director of flight operations called me in and asked me if I would be willing to be chief astronaut. I said, absolutely, it'd be an honor. I think I was the 14th one, the first one being Deke Slayton.
Right.
So it was pretty humbling to walk into the office every day and see Deke and then 13 photos and then me.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it was crazy.
That's amazing.
It was a little not mind-blowing for a while. Then you settle in and you figure out it's just another job. And the primary role of the chief astronaut, you're sort of in charge of the day-to-day stuff, but the critical job is assigning the crews. So we would meet with the other, I'll call them chief astronauts, but the other equivalent position of all the 5 international partners. And this coming year we've got 2 missions we got to assign. I'm thinking about putting Joe and Sally and Chris And then the Japanese and other guys would say, okay, let's do this. And then we would assign and agree upon the upcoming slate of crews.
So when did you retire, and did you retire from NASA before you retired from the Navy, or did that happen concurrently?
Happened concurrently. So as you know, as a military person, unless you're a flag officer or an E9, you pretty much have to get out at 30 years.
Right.
So I was commissioned in 1993. My 30-year mark was 2023, and this was, I got back at the end of 2020, and by the way, I launched right as COVID started. I left the planet. Myself and 2 Russians were the only two people, the only 2 human beings not on planet Earth for the start of the first 7 months of COVID.
Wow.
So I came back at the end of 2020, and then as I got into 2021, I kind of knew that I had to make a decision. I could either stay active duty for 2 more years and just keep supporting the astronaut office. I wouldn't have a mission, but I'd just be working there just to get to 30 and defer the big decision, which was, do I retire militarily and just convert over to be a civil servant and remain doing the astronaut job, which I loved being an astronaut. I loved the job, I loved the mission, I loved the people.
Sure.
So that was a very enticing option, to just hang up my uniform but stay at NASA and be a GS-15 or whatever. And or if there was ever a time to try something new, that would be the time. And I knew I desired to go back to space, but as the more I thought about it, like, one more trip to space, does that make me more marketable to some civilian company? They don't care.
Right.
It doesn't matter. The only difference is I was 51. Instead of being 51, 5, 6, 7 years later, I'd be 58.
Right.
And that they care about.
Yes.
So I thought, it'd be cool. It's good to be a new guy every now and then, experience new things and recharge your batteries.
Yes.
And so I knew going into the launch of that last mission that I was going to be done with NASA after I got back, and then I just planned the retirement from the Navy to be concurrent with when I was leaving.
I see. So what was your favorite part of serving, either in the Navy or with NASA, or maybe those are 2 separate things? What was your favorite part of serving?
Probably a common answer, but I understand why it is a common answer. It's the people. Having now been a leader in a civilian organization, been a leader in a military organization, been a leader in a civilian government organization, all those are seemingly different. But what this is the same is, in a SEAL platoon, in a shuttle crew, in a nonprofit building a museum, it's a small group of people all pulling on oars to go to make the boat go in a direction. And the job of the leader is to get those oars in sync, pulling uniformly so the boat goes straight.
Right.
And so that's the same whether it's a group of SEALs and the bad guys are bad guys with guns, or if it's a crew and the bad guy is the environment that's hostile, or it's a group in the nonprofit where the stress comes from, oh my God, we got to pay for a big building, we got to deliver a good product to the country. It's different stress, but it's still real. And so at the end of the day, it's just people doing those missions.
Right.
And so it's not like I miss people, because I got them here. Like, I'm in Arlington, I'm surrounded by people.
Right.
But I think you know what I mean.
Yes.
It's the mission in the SEAL teams and the humor that exists there. It's the camaraderie, the international camaraderie that exists on the space station. That's one answer. The other if you pinned me down and said, no, I want a real answer that's not what everybody would say, it's spacewalking. Nothing like it. Unbelievable.
I can't even imagine.
It is so cool. It's hard work. You're in that suit for the spacewalk is about 6.5 hours long, but putting the suit on and getting the acclimatization to the pressures, it's a whole technical process, takes about 4 hours. So you're inside the suit for 10, 11 hours.
Wow.
With a 32-ounce bag of water. That's it. There's no food. That's all the water you got. It's hard work. It's a long day, but it is so rewarding. It's so special. Those memories are in my head, and there's nothing like it out there.
What was the lowest point of that during the time that you served? What was the lowest point?
There's a couple examples. One time in that SEAL Team 3 platoon, when we were leading up to getting ready to deploy, we had one member of the unit who wasn't performing to standard. He had completed SEAL training. He had done other SEAL platoons. He had a couple years in the SEAL teams, but he just wasn't clicking, and he wasn't performing to the standard of the platoon. And it was causing tension. And I kind of thought, okay, well, there's nothing going on in our country. We can still deploy. This was before 9/11. Had some counseling sessions with him. This is where you got to improve on. And then 9/11 happened, and all of a sudden it changed from we're just going to go overseas and maybe be responsible to something. Who knows?
Right.
And so, how bad can a non-performer hurt you? To all of a sudden, no, we're going directly into combat. Is there any room for somebody that's not to the standard? And so having to let that person know that he was not coming with us was the first real difficult thing I had to do as a leader of a small unit. Like, look that guy in the eye and say, hey, you're not coming. And not be able to go, sorry, man, the boss says you can't come.
Right.
Here's my decision. If my boss and the command master chief had said, what do you want to take him? You can take him. You want to leave him? You can leave him, which they did say. So it was 100% my decision. So I'm looking at this guy telling him, hey, it's my view that you are not safe for us to come. That was super, super hard, and a kind of a little low point for me because I felt bad for him and, knew his family and stuff. So that was a challenge. Yeah.
Well, let's jump forward a little bit and talk about the National Medal of Honor Museum. How did that come about? How did the offer for you to become the president and CEO of the National Medal of Honor Museum come about?
So right about the time where I was done, I'd come back from space, and when you come back from space, there's a 6-month period of time where you have an intense medical thing for the first month, and then you have a few medical check-ins because they want. The big thing medically about spaceflight is you do baseline testing before you go, and then you have this experience, and then they want to get how did that experience affect your body?
Sure, yeah.
So you have a lot in the first couple weeks, and then a month, and 2 months, and 3 months, 4 and 6 month check-ins, and then you kind of less frequently check back in. But so I knew that at the end of that 6-month period from coming back from space is when I would probably be looking to move on, but I didn't know what. Right. It's very natural for an astronaut to go to a Lockheed or a Boeing or SpaceX or Sierra Space or Blue Origin or any number of these space community companies. And I had done some legwork to line that up with a company in Houston, a space company down in Houston. And in fact, I even started as a little consulting for them. And right about that time, my good friend who's on the board of directors here at the Navy SEAL, or at the Medal of Honor Museum, we were at SEAL training together. We were swim buddies in SEAL training. And he was a civilian, and now he's on the board. And because we were friends, he knew that I was wrapping up my military career. And he called and said, hey, and because he was on the board, he knew that the previous CEO had to step aside for some medical reasons. And so he called me and said, hey, would you be interested in just learning about this position? And we had kind of mental momentum as a family, because my wife also works for NASA.
Oh.
And worked for NASA. And so she was retiring also at the same time. And so we could live anywhere. And we were kind of thinking like Tampa or Pensacola, somewhere in the panhandle of Florida we like a lot. And we were thinking move in that direction, and moving first and then worrying about jobs, because I had a military retirement, she had a civil servant retirement. So we would pay for groceries and stuff, and we'd figure out the work part.
Right.
And so we kind of had this east on I-10 mentality, and then he called me and said, would you be interested? And where is it? It's up in Dallas. Well, it's really Arlington. Come on up and see it. Oh, okay, I'll do that. And so I came up one day, and actually we were in Annapolis. We had just dropped off our son for plebe summer. So I flew from Annapolis, from DC, got here. Mayor Williams, Jeff Williams met me, showed me all around. I drove up to the Star and met Charlotte and had an interview with her, and I just kind of saw what this was, what Arlington was, and what was infectious was I could tell what the vision of what Arlington would be. And even then in 2000, I could tell that the leadership existed, that they really meant it. And they were excited about the Medal of Honor Museum, because I was also intimidated, like, how am I gonna, I don't know how to raise $300 million. I've never raised $1 before. Right. This is out of my wheelhouse. But then getting here and realizing that the Cowboys and the Joneses and the city were all 100% behind it, that there was some serious horsepower, that we had to do our part as a staff, but the backing up was there to make it be a successful project. And I really liked Arlington. I remember going home and telling my wife, they got this cool sports bar with giant TV and places where you could sit and have wings and beer and watch sports all around you. Texas Live. Right. And no, but in all seriousness, and the stadiums and the environment, it just was really cool, and I wanted to be a part of it.
Did the sports bar mean as much to your wife as it did to you?
No, and ironically, no disrespect to my live friends in Jim Watry, but we don't go there a ton. It's a younger crowd's game over there, but it's still a cool vibe. And when you come here and we bring friends into the community who are visiting, and they see stadium, Texas Live, Convention Center, now the museum being built, people go, wow, there's a lot happening here in little old Arlington, Texas.
Yeah. Just a couple more questions. This is a pretty obvious one to me, but if you had the choice, would you serve all over again? Oh yeah, gosh, absolutely. I feel like I'm still serving right now, just without my uniform on. Right. That's what is so special, meaningful for me. Mm-hmm. Like I said, would I have the same satisfaction, no disrespect to like a Lockheed Martin? I understand. But if I was there, even if it was working on a cool project, would it have the same sense of service? Maybe, but I doubt it. This feels like we're delivering a product to the nation that will stand the test of time, and that part is really, really cool. And it all goes back to serving in the first place. So what impact did the service have on your life? The 17-year-old me would roll his eyes at this answer, but at some point in your military career, you look down and you see an American flag on your shoulder, and it really means something to you. And you notice that even more when you look down and it's not there anymore. Yes. Yeah. And so that feeling, or that absence of feeling, is service. Mm-hmm. And serving the country. And there's lots of ways to serve too. First responders and police and ER doctors and nurses and all of that
is a way to serve teachers.
Yes.
But it's this concept of others above self, nation above self, that I think is so meaningful.
What advice do you have for young people who are entering the military today?
Well, what I love about the military service is all of us have a beginning and all of us have an end. And usually the beginning is somewhat similar, boot camp, some sort of indoctrination thing, and the end is some sort of farewell, either at a 5-year mark or 10-year mark or a retirement ceremony. But the line between those two dots is a different path for every single one of us. But the common thing that we all experience on those journeys is this tremendous sense of camaraderie, this tremendous sense of friendship, this tremendous sense of network of people that you wouldn't have never been encountered with, and the service component that we just talked about. All of those things are such that even now, when you and I meet, I don't know when you got out, but there's a bond there that you served in the Air Force, I was in the Navy. You walking through an airport and you see a guy with, when I see a guy with a Marine Corps t-shirt or something, I say Semper Fi, and he looks at me like, what?
Yeah.
And all of that are the cool experiences that, I mean, just rich experiences. You're not going to be rich in your wallet, but you're rich with friendship, rich with experiences, and rich with service.
Well, is there anything that you would like to add to this interview that we haven't yet discussed?
No, don't think so.
I think we covered it all.
Yeah, I think we covered it all.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for agreeing to be interviewed and taking time out of your busy week to be here. I really appreciate it. And
Yeah,
we'll close it right there. Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you.